now we enter a new world, a world of books and of writing and of stories. And as you know from our discussion of Luke, he starts right out, he opens the opening of his book by saying, I have consulted all the documents. I've consulted all the documents that exist, the many accounts that exist. In other words, there were already many accounts of Jesus' life. And now I'm going to put together an ordered account. In other words, a history. I'm going to put together an ordered account as best I can, knowing all I do. So that's a new era now, right? Don't you all agree? That's a new era. That's chapter 3, when you're reading these things down and you're trying to organize thoughts. Now, next junction. The next junction is circa 100. And the year 100 is a mark because, number one, at the year 100, the first generation is dying. So by 100, everyone who would have known Jesus or known the apostles is gone. So near 100, you have another new era. That is an era without the apostles, without anybody. We think maybe John lived 90 years, and if he lived 90 years and he died in, say, the year 90, then even a long-lived person like John is gone. So at 100, you're entering a new world where you have to rely on the documents. The Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are even more important than ever. The first generation is gone, and you're entering into a new Roman world because your numbers are increasing, you're more of a threat, you're more of a danger, and so we have someone at about the year 100, and his name is Pliny the Younger, Pliny, Pliny the Younger, 61 AD to 113. And Pliny the Younger was a great writer. He was born in Lake Como. He was from Como, and then he became an important person in Roman administration. And here at around 100, he had a job, an administrator of a province that was in present-day Turkey. So in other words, Asia Minor. So this is part of the Christian world. That coast of Turkey was a very busy Christian world. Ephesus, all those cities up and down the coast. And so now, in his job, in Asia Minor, he was suddenly confronted with Christians being arrested and brought before him for action. And he had not had this happen before. He was a very good person, a very moral person. He wanted to do the right thing. And so he wrote to his friend, the Emperor Trajan. The emperor was a personal friend. He'd been sent out to this job by the emperor. So he was writing to the highest power in the Roman Empire. And in his letter, he writes to the emperor, and he says, I don't really know what to do about these Christians. They're being brought before me on charges, and I don't know how to investigate. I don't know what to do. And so here's what I'm doing. Here's what I'm doing. And he spelled out in great detail how he handled them and how he would call them before his court. And he would give them 3 chances to deny they were Christians. So he'd first say, are you a Christian? You know, it's not a good thing to be Christian. And they'd say yes. And he'd say, now wait, I'm going to ask you again, but keep in mind, this is not a good thing to be a Christian. So now I'm going to ask you again, are you a Christian? And they would say, yes, I am. And then he'd say, now wait a minute. Do you remember there's a punishment of death if you're a Christian? So I'm going to ask you again. And so are you a Christian? And they'd say, yes. Uh-oh. So he wrote all these details to the emperor, and the emperor wrote back to him and said, well, the way you're doing it is fine. But the reason it's so important is it tells us that around 100, the numbers of the Christians were growing. Their presence in Roman society was more visible. The Roman administration was clearly going to, if necessary, crack down on them. And here was one Roman official who wrote all this down, described in great detail his dealings with the Christians. So that helps us know 100 marker. As I just said, that first generation is gone. You're not going to be able to ask them what happened. You're relying on the documents. And we know by 100, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and the letters of Paul are available to people. They're circulating, and people are reading them. And the reason we know that is people wrote books around the year 100, and they quoted sections, large sections of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So we know by 100 they're there. Okay? So that's 100. Now, the next cross point for us is 250. And it's called the Decian persecution from the name Decius, D-E-C-I-U-S. As you can see, Decius was not emperor for very long. He was only emperor from 249, 250 to 251. But, again, it's a marker, because Decius was aggressively persecuting the Christians, dramatically and aggressively. And therefore, that year of 250 produces a whole long list of famous martyrs. In most cities, particularly Italian cities, if you go to the cities and you read who the first Christian martyr was, like in Florence at San Miniato, he was martyred in 250. And if you go to Verona, the San Zeno, for whom the great Basilica of San Zeno is named, he was martyred in 250. You go to Modena, and you can keep doing it. You'll notice again and again there's a prominent person, often the bishop, who was martyred in 250. So 250 is another marker of persecution in which the Christian community is being aggressively attacked. But of course it only lasts a few years, and then Decius died, and so his persecution stopped. So it's a brief but very powerful persecution, and the numbers of Christians was growing. Now, the next intersection is Diocletian. Diocletian is emperor from 284 to 305, so roughly 20 years. Born in 245, died in 311. But what's most important about Diocletian is that now this is 300. So you see, first we talked about where we had come in the year 100, and then in the 200s, rather severe crackdown under Decius, and now it's almost 300. And in the year circa 303, Diocletian decides that the numbers of Christians were growing. They were in the millions now. Within the empire of 70 million or so, they were maybe 10%. And he decided that there was no way they could go forward with Christians in the standing right next to non-Christians in the armies, and so he would eliminate all the Christians. So he launched in 303 the most massive crackdown with the intention of rounding up and killing all the Christians in the empire. Diocletian. And so for 2 years, 305, 304, 5, 6, so 2 years or 3, he ordered the army to round up whole congregations. In some cases, the congregation would gather in the church, which were illegal, and the soldiers would surround the church, order them to all come out, and they would refuse. And so the general, whoever was on the scene, would announce to them that if they didn't come out, he would burn the church down, and they wouldn't come out. And he would then burn up the whole congregation. He would fire the church, and the whole church, everybody would burn up. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people inside would all be burned up together. So the Diocletian persecution is the worst of the whole 300 years from 0 to 300. And it's a failure. It is a failure. It only adds to the strength of the Christian community. It does not frighten them. They do not refuse to identify themselves as Christians. They do identify themselves as Christians. And so therefore, the Christian community is not in any way frightened into non-belief. And of course, he can't round up everybody because so many people are sympathetic to them, and so many of them have relatives that eventually the whole policy is revealed as a disaster, causing dissension and chaos in Rome. And he finally just resigns. He says, okay, I throw up my hands. If I can't kill them all, I'll quit. And so in 305, he resigned and retired to his villa in the Dalmatian coast. And so he lived happily ever after in his little villa, cursing the Christians, of course. And the reason that it's so important is that it just shows you that the most powerful man in the world at the year 300 could not just kill them all. It couldn't be done. And it only strengthened them. And, most important of all, in the next years, the next emperor, the next man with the power to decide how to handle the Christians was a man, Constantine, who decides the exact opposite. Not only will he not try to kill them all, he will make them legal. He will make them legal. So the disaster of the Diocletian persecution is a complete failure, and instead comes the Constantinian toleration, which is in the form of the Edict of Milan 313. Very important. Number one, it shows you Milan is extremely important in the early 300s. That's the first thing to remember, because when we talk about Ambrose and Augustine, a lot of the story is in Milan. So that's the first thing. Milan is really more important than Rome in 300. So it's in Milan, and it's 313, and everybody here should remember that date for the rest of your life. You should be saying it as you shuffle off to heaven there. 313, 313, because it's the Edict of Toleration, and it is Constantine saying to the entire Roman Empire, we will allow the Christians. There will be toleration in the Roman Empire, and you can be both a Roman God worshiper, you can go to the temple and worship the gods that people have been worshiping, or you can go and worship Jesus Christ. We will tolerate both. And so you can see that in 300, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, up to 13, it's the most dramatic transformation of the relationship between Christians and empire ever, you see, ever, because it goes from an attempt to completely obliterate them to the exact opposite and make them completely legal. And that's all happening in 13 years. So it's an extraordinary episode, and Constantine quite correctly is remembered, of course, in the history of Christianity. In addition, in 325, he calls together the Council of Nicaea. Nicaea is close to Constantinople, to put together everything that the Christians believe. Now it's public. Now everybody has to say out loud what they believe. And so he calls all the bishops, 1,800 priests and bishops from all over Christianity. They're all called to this location close to Constantinople. He hadn't built Constantinople yet, but he was planning it. And so it was that point there on the Bosphorus. And they all joined together and write together the ideas of what will be the Christian belief.